most important things is interviewing. Interviewing is typically that final step of the process where you have a chance to convince an employer you're the right fit to work for them. So over the years, again, I've had a lot of chance to work with students and managers and employers on hiring students. So today, what I hope to do is share some of the lessons I've learned over the years. I only have about an hour to do it, so I'm not going to be able to give you everything you need to know, but I hope to at least kind of scratch the surface, get you thinking about what's required to have a successful interview, what you can do to prepare for an interview, and then ultimately give you some takeaway tips so that if you wish to get some further information, you know who to contact, what to contact them about, and basically a few other things that will help you as you look for a job after you're graduating. And today, specifically, there's a lot of different interviewing out there. We're going to talk specifically about something called a behavioral-based interview. It's a particular interviewing technique, so I just kind of preface it with that. But before I even start talking about what you can do to interview successfully, let me just kind of turn the tables a little bit and ask you to kind of put your minds kind of in the mindset of an employer looking to hire somebody and looking to interview people. So I'm just going to throw a quick question out to you. If you were that hiring manager, you're working for a company, so what's the point of interviewing? What do you think?
Find a candidate that has certain things that are the right fit for the job or the company.
Basically, up to now, everything's been how to get your foot in the door, how to get them to notice you. The point of interviewing, ultimately, to hire somebody. And specifically, what do you think they're looking to hire somebody to do? What are some of the key things you'd be hired to do, regardless of the company? Manage people, could they? What else?
Solve problems.
Solve problems? Yeah.
They have
what
problems,
else?
they need them solved.
You got it. What else?
The job.
To do the job? But also big picture. Why do these jobs exist? What are going to make the company? What's that?
Make money.
Profitable, make money.
Not screw up.
Not screw up, that can definitely be an impact. Yeah, they're basically looking to hire people that can make the organization better, make the company profitable, make widgets, who knows what. But they're not hiring just to fill a seat. They're going to have some type of function within the organization. Here are some of the main things that will help the company produce more, better, whatever, widgets, as I said. Help the organization outperform the competition. Promote higher levels of employee morale. I think someone over here hit the other end of that, bad apples sometimes. Overall, make a significant contribution to the bottom line profitability of the company. If I'm interviewing somebody, this is when I used to interview, typically, one of these things would, be addressed by if I hired the right person. So this is what the person on the other side of the table is probably trying to do for most positions. And there might be someone who doesn't quite fit one of those categories, but typically, that's the whole purpose of interviewing. We'll talk about the risks in a second. That's kind of the point of interviewing. Now, in a little bit, we'll talk about what a successful interview looks like. But let's say, again, you're that hiring manager, and let's say, as a hiring manager, you're interviewing people, and you screw up. What's the impact to the company? Let's say I hire the wrong person. What happens? Waste time.
Loss in productivity for a while.
Loss in productivity. What else? Loss of revenue, you could go bankrupt. What else? Any of you ever work with somebody that hated?
Could be a chain reaction, right?
Yeah, it was a chain reaction. Somebody's getting employee morale issues, that goes downhill, costs the company money. And guess who everybody in the organization starts looking at when that happens?
The person that hired you.
The person that hired, right. Yeah, they get mad at the person that hired them. I mean, the person that's bad is a bad apple. They'll either get fired or they'll walk themselves out, who knows what. But then they turn around to the person that hired them and say, my God, what the heck were you doing? What were you thinking? How did you interview this person? So the reason I just kind of bring that up, not only does the candidate sometimes have pressure, you feel like you're under pressure when you're interviewing, but I should let you know, sometimes the person doing the interviewing is under these same pressures that they have to pick the right person. They have to they have to be able to justify why they hired somebody and why they made the selection that they did. So a lot of companies put a lot of effort into their interviewing processes to try to figure out who the best candidate is. And today I'm going to talk to you again about this kind of idea of behavioral-based interviewing because it has been proven that this behavioral interview is the best way for companies to hire and the best way for companies to evaluate people. There's a lot of different ways companies can interview. Today we're going to talk about one specific way that, again, I think can really help you out. So, kind of back to that poor selection process, we hit upon a couple of these: increased cost, bad morale, can disrupt customer service. These are all issues that potentially pop up. We talked about the increased cost. I think somebody mentioned it. Anybody have an idea what a bad hire can cost an organization? Give me an example. Let's say I hire somebody out of school at about, say, $50,000 a year, and they leave after 6 months. How much do you think that actually costs the company? How much money, I guess if a company had to put a dollar amount to a bad hire?
3,200. I recently read it somewhere.
How much?
3,200.
3,200?
I just saw it yesterday somewhere.
1,000? Or any other guesses? How much money that would cost a company? Or what cost it would attribute to a bad hire? If I hired one of the companies I work for, Ryan Homes, we would hire people typically out of school between 50 and 60,000. And if they left within the first 6 months, we kind of did some calculations of what we paid, not only what we paid the person, what the recruiting costs were, as well as the lost opportunity costs of that person not being enrolled. And typically it was about anywhere from 1 to 2 times the person's annual salary is what it would cost us. So if they left in half a year, we might pay, say, $25,000 in salary, but then we're also lost opportunity cost was about $50,000. Recruiting cost was another $5,000 to $10,000 to hire somebody. Some other training costs got put into place. So we're going to bring it up. It's very expensive if companies make a bad hire. They don't want to do it. And then also, for a candidate, you don't want to be in a position where you're accepting a position that's not a right fit. You're going to be unhappy. You're going to be coming back to Ken or I down the road saying, hey, I need a new job. So whole point of interviewing is to try to find kind of a good match between the company's looking for and what skills you have. So again, I hope today as we go through this presentation, I want to give you some tips and opportunities to kind of showcase what skills and qualifications you have for the role, so the course selection process does not happen. So how does a company ensure they're hiring the right person? Typically it boils down to a couple things that an interviewer is looking to analyze. They want to know your work, educational history, any certifications you have, and skills you have, just broadly speaking. They want to know some specific experiences that you have that relate to the position. And finally, this one sometimes gets left off in these conversations, but what are your interests? What are your desires? What do you want to do? I not only want to know you're qualified to do something, but I also want to know you're passionate about it. I want to know you have a strong interest in working for my company. These days, it's not enough just to tell somebody you have the bare qualifications. There's probably 2 or 3 or 10 other people that have similar qualifications. So how do you get beyond just the qualifications? Well, if your long-term interests, your desires, your passion line up with what the company is doing, you might, again, just further stand out from the crowd. So I want to make sure when you go on an interview that you've done your homework, you know what the company is looking for in these areas, and then while you're interviewing, you can share what from your background matches what they're looking for. So how does a company figure that out? How do they figure out if you have those particular skill sets? Well, there's a couple ways companies can go about doing it, and this list probably hits about 80%, maybe 90% of the ways companies will try to get that information. Good news and bad news is there's good ways to get that information, and there's some not so good ways that companies go about getting that information. Now, so if a company is interviewing you, there's a couple things at the bottom of the list that I'd say are not great ways to figure out if you're going to be a good candidate for the position. Credential verification. That's something as simple as, did you graduate from Drexel? Could be that type of question. It's a yes or no question. How am I going to figure out if you're good at my job by asking that question? I don't care what I'm hiring for. If I say, did you graduate? Yes, no? Maybe it tells me a little bit about you, but it's not going to tell me if you're good at a job. Yeah, a lot of companies ask those type of questions. So just be ready for that. It's part of the, part of the course of interviewing. Be ready for it. It's not a great question to ask. Experience verification. If you've been on an interview, sometimes they'll say, do you have 2 years of experience? Anyone ever see that on a list of questions before you apply somewhere? Personally, I think that's the worst question you can ask in the world. Because I have 6 years of experience here at Drexel, but is that enough to convince you guys that I'm a good career counselor? If I just said I had 6 years experience? It doesn't tell you anything about me. It just tells you I've been doing this for 6 years and Drexel hasn't gotten rid of me yet. Maybe that's a good thing. It probably means I'm good at it, but it's not enough. So that's typically what I consider, it's a question that's asked a lot, but it doesn't tell me a lot about a person. Yeah?
A lot of people in engineering, so you do research for 2 to 4 years in a year. Can you say that that's, like, if you've been nothing but in school for the past 4 or 5 years, can you say that you also have 4 or 5 years experience? even?
If it's a research position, if you've done research here at Drexel for 4 to 5 years, and that's one of the requirements that they state, yeah, I might write it that way. I'd have to see a little more about what you did and exactly what you did, but again, it's a requirement for the position. And kind of back to what Brennan was talking about, inserting stuff into a cover letter, I might insert that. For the past 4 years, I've been conducting research on these particular things while at Drexel. So that way, it's not kind of totally saying I have 40 years of industry experience, but I have 4 years of research experience in these specific topics, kind of while at Drexel. Not as strong as saying it's industry experience, but at least you have that 4 years of experience. But yeah, sometimes it can be kind of a screening criteria that companies use. And it's a question that might be asked, and they'll say, do you have the 4 years of experience? It's a yes or no question. It's tough for me to predict if someone's going to be good at, with that answer. But again, it just gets asked. So I'm just kind of throwing it out there just to let you know, these are some questions, types of techniques people ask. Other questions that come up, opinion questions, dumb questions. Has anyone been asked a dumb question on an interview? Ever been asked? Ken, I think we talked about this before. What was the one you had?
I worked with a student once, the first question she was asked was, tell me a joke.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And the student comes back, I don't know any jokes. And the interviewer said, we're not proceeding with the interview until you can tell me one. So she thinks of a joke that her younger sister had told her. She knew it wasn't funny, but she was desperate, so she had to say something. Why do you think that kind of question, it's a type of interview that hopefully you don't have to experience, but it's asked for a reason. Why do you think they ask a question like that? Well, it's one, but it's not what they're looking for. There's something else they're trying to do about the job itself. No.
Just to throw you off, but.
Well, think about it. What type of job maybe are they asking that question about?
Customer service.
I heard something.
Customer service. Basically.
Well, no, think about it. It puts the person in a stressful situation, right? Because who would think of anybody's going to be asked a question like that? So the job is probably what? High stress. It's a test. It's called a stress interview.
So is that a dumb question? Or?
I would put that into for me personally, if that's what they use to figure out if somebody operates under stress, I would say I would say it's a dumb question.
You're going to get asked a lot of dumb questions.
Yeah.
It's just.
But long story short, the reason I just bring it up, you might get asked it, keep a positive attitude if you get asked a dumb question, and just roll with it at the end of the day. The reality is I don't think they're going to be able to use that information to predict whether you'd be good on a job. My managers were asking questions like that, or questions like what kind of animal would you be if you could be any animal, what's your favorite color. I mean, I've seen some what I call dumb questions. They happen out there. So I'm just kind of throwing it out there, prepping for interviews. Don't get too caught off guard if you get asked one of those. The reason I didn't like them when I was an HR manager, because when there's been studies done on these questions, it turns out that they don't predict how you're going to do on the job. So why ask it if it's not going to help it out? Now, if you get kind of above the dumb and you get into this area of math, case, and behavioral interviews, that's where you start actually getting some correlation between the answer somebody gives, the question, and more importantly, how they're going to do on the job. So you may get asked more math, case, and behavioral interviews, or behavioral type interview questions when you're interviewing. A math question, especially for the engineers in the class, they may propose some type of basic math question to you or a complex math question. Be ready to answer. A case question is normally a kind of a business case to be presented to you where they'll give you some facts about a particular industry, what's happening in the industry, and will basically ask you, what would you do if given this case, if this situation was presented to you? How would you solve it? What solution would you come up with? For any of those in the room that may have interviewed with Deloitte Consulting last week here at Drexel, they did a kind of split interview where 30 minutes was a case interview where they basically presented a business case to a student, and then they would have to solve it or give their best answers to questions based on what they were presented. And the other half of the interview was on behavioral type interview. So that's how they did it. And I said, today we're going to spend pretty much all of our time on the behavioral interviewing techniques. The nice thing I believe about learning how to answer behavior-based interview questions is you can pretty much answer any of these questions in a behavioral format. So even if you're asked a credential verification question or an experience verification question, I'm going to use some tips and tricks today where you can kind of give the employer more information that they're asking so that ultimately they'll have enough information to make the right decision about hiring. So that's kind of, just want to give you a little background that, today we're going to talk about behavioral interviewing. After today, you might go on an interview and go, wow, they never talked about about this behavior interviewing? I never asked that type of question. Well, they either did ask the question, you didn't realize it, or maybe they asked one of these other questions. And again, I'm going to teach you some tricks where you can incorporate the strategies of behavioral interviewing into some of those other questions. Because ultimately, it's a two-way street here again. I want the company making the right decision to hire you, and then also, I want you to make the right decision about working for a company. You know, sometimes students ask, you know, kind of come to me and say, you know, Andy, I'm really bummed, I didn't get the job. And my first question is, well, you know, did you want the job? You know, something like, well, no, not really, but I'm just mad I didn't get it. Well, I don't care, I'll be honest with you then. You know, I care about when there's a job you want, you don't get it, you think you're qualified for it. That, maybe I can help you out. So, the whole theory behind behavioral interviewing. We kind of talked about the different types of interviewing. Here's kind of the here's the philosophy behind behavioral interviewing. It's basically that past behavior or performance can be used to accurately predict future behavior. Makes sense. However you acted in the past is going to be the best predictor of how you acted in the future. Let me give you an example of where this philosophy kind of usually doesn't hold much water. Anybody watched any of the recent presidential elections or elections that are out there? Politicians are notorious for avoiding this whole past behavior thing. They always say what in an election? If I'm elected, I'm going to do this. You know, how often do they really tell you about what they've done in the past? It's rarely asked. It's rarely talked about. Then we act surprised when, you know, for instance, maybe there's a president in place that, you know, how should I phrase it? To be politically correct. How should I tackle that one again?
You're talking about Obamacare?
Yeah, where he makes all these, you know, he makes all these promises. If you elect me, I'm going to do this. Then 6 months, 2 years later, find out, it's not working like I said it was going to. You know, why is that? Well, politicians, and sometimes when people interview, they answer questions along the lines of, well, if I'm put in this position, I'm going to do all these great things. And more often than not, it leads to problems. It leads to, it's tough to prove whether someone's going to do a good job or not. A better way to predict if someone's going to do a good job or not would be to ask slightly different questions. Instead of asking somebody, hey, what are you going to do on this project? If I hire you, what will you do on this project? A better way to ask the question might be, you know, while you're at Drexel University, what programs did you write that would showcase your C++ skills? Give me an example of a time when you had to write a program that could do these things. Give me an example of a time you worked in a lab setting where you had to use a microscope, something basic like that. But if you can show through your past that you've done something, it's a lot easier for me as an employer to go, oh yeah, you know what, they've already done this thing 2 or 3 times. I can then therefore say, you know what, they'll probably do the job and they can do these things. And they're going to apply that theory when they're looking at your work, education skills, experiences, and interests. They want to know what you've done in the past in those areas. They don't want to know that you might go on to a graduate degree. They want to know you got the graduate degree. They want to know you have the 4 years of research experience, not that you want to do 2 more years of research experience. They want to know what you've done in the past. And when they're kind of lumping these things together, they look for specific behaviors, or the HR term is typically called target dimensions. Now, out there in the world, you know, there's probably, how many job titles? Because there's thousands and thousands of job titles. But if you give me any job title, I can pretty much boil down what behaviors they're looking for, or target dimensions, usually to about 6 to 8 dimensions that are critical for each job. And it is different depending on the job that you're looking at. The sheet in front of you, just go over your shoulder. Everybody should have this sheet that has 2 columns on it. These are a list of dimensions that I've used at 3 of the companies that I've worked at. Other companies may have a slightly different set of dimensions, but typically, most jobs that are out there require a person to have anywhere from 6 to 8, maybe a few more, maybe a few less of these, target dimensions. So depending on the job you're looking at, it's going to determine what dimensions are critical. So let's just take a moment. If you look at this list, and kind of put your mind back in the mindset of an interviewer, and that someone's interviewing. If I was hiring for an engineer, what on here do you think is critical? And I know you don't know all these definitions of exactly what, what some of these terms mean, but just kind of use your judgment. If it says, let's see, if one of them is sales ability, and it's basically can the person sell something. It's not a stretch to define these terms. So if I was hiring an engineer, what on here do you think would be critical for an engineer?
Innovation.
What?
Innovation.
What's that?
Innovation.
Innovation? What was it? Applied learning. Very good. What else?
Technical professional knowledge.
Technical professional knowledge. Yep. Very good. What else?
Safety.
What's that?
Safety awareness.
Safety awareness. I would say it depends on what type of engineer you are. If you are working in a manufacturing setting, safety awareness could be huge. If you're working in research and development, maybe depending on what type of product you're working on. So sometimes it actually depends on what position you're doing within a particular discipline. What else for engineers?
Work standards.
Work standards?
Continuous learning.
What was it? Continuous learning? Okay. How about a different type of position? Let's say I was looking to hire a salesperson to sell those widgets that I just hired somebody to make. Say it a little louder.
Building customer loyalty.
Wait, what?
Building customer loyalty.
Building customer loyalty?
Communication.
Communication? What else?
Building trust.
Building trust?
Customer focus.
Customer focus, yeah. What was this one over here? You said energy? Yeah, what's funny? Not many people get energy. Are you a salesperson, Lance? Energy is basically the ability for somebody that just seems to always be kind of running around, no matter what, nothing's going to get them down. They're just going to keep plugging away at it. And our top salespeople at one of my companies, that was actually the only dimension we really cared about. Did they have high energy? The people that scored off the charts on energy, we would teach them everything else about being a salesperson. But that would seem to be one of the things. But very few people actually put that down or say that. So I point that out. How about if I was looking for a leader of an organization? Before we were looking for a particular job title, what if just in general I wanted a leader for an organization?
Energy.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to say energy now.
Yeah, energy. Yeah. I'm a manager.
Risk taking.
Managing work.
Managing conflict, managing work. What else?
Building a successful team.
Building a successful team.
Building trust.
Building trust, yeah. So, what was that?
Stress tolerance.
Stress tolerance, yeah, that actually is one of the, believe it or not, that's actually one of the top ones for a typical leader, regardless of what level. Some of the other answers that were given might depend on what level of leader we have. But stress tolerance, usually the higher up in an organization you get, sometimes you think it's easy at the top, but a lot of times those people are under a lot of stress from a lot of different areas. So stress tolerance becomes usually more and more critical as you go up in the organization. The reason I did that little exercise with you today, I just want you to start thinking about kind of these categories of what dimensions are critical for different jobs. We just did it for 4 different jobs, we just kind of, or 3 different ones, we just kind of randomly picked. But as you start thinking about how you're going to be successful in an interview, how you're going to showcase your skills, one of the key things that's critical is, well, hey, we got to take a step back and let's figure out what dimensions are critical for a particular job or industry that you're applying to. If you don't have a specific job you're applying to and just want to practice, I can give you some general dimensions that are good for engineering or biomed or accounting. And there's different general dimensions. But the best bet, as Ken mentioned, tell me what job you're looking for. And I can give you a better list of dimensions that they're probably going to be interviewing for. And if I'm not working for the company, I can't guarantee that it's going to be it. But I've been doing this a long time. Most companies, it's not that hard to figure it out what they're looking for. Read the job description. Go on their website. Read about their backgrounds. Do an informational interview. Trust me, you'll get all these answers within probably a half hour of doing those steps. You should know what they're looking for. And on top of that, in addition to preparing for an interview, that can also help you potentially go back and rewrite your resume or rewrite your cover letter if you know what dimensions are critical to work there. Hey, well, let me take a minute to maybe refine my resume if I have to. If you're not getting interviews, you're not going to get your foot in the door, it could be because your resume is not lining up with dimensions that they're looking for. And then how do you target your resume to those dimensions? Well, look at that list Ken gave out earlier of action verbs. And he kind of broke it up by kind of broad categories of technical areas, research areas. You can map those pretty quickly to particular dimensions. It's not that tough to do. That's stuff that we'll work with you on if you have trouble on. So again, these were some of the things that I just kind of jotted down some quick mentions that I thought were critical for these jobs. But again, ultimately it depends on the company, where you're going. You may have some slightly different things. But for sales ability, communication, job fit, negotiation, energy, For engineers, technical professional skills, applied learning, decision-making, planning, continuous learning. I think we hit just about all of those. Leader, we hit a couple of those. And then again, I had a general team member up top. We didn't go through that. But again, the idea is just to get you thinking about, hey, these are dimensions that are important in different jobs. As you start preparing for your futures, you want to make sure that your dimension is strong in certain areas. Now, how does a company go about getting this information? We talked a little bit about the idea of behavioral interviewing. Well, how are they going to ask a question? Typically the questions are in three, kind of in blocks of three. They're going to ask what we call a positioning statement that precedes the actual question. So they're kind of going to set you up for what they want to know. They're not going to come out of the blue and throw some wild question at you. They usually throw what we call a positioning statement. Then they'll ask a question stem, which represents what data they're looking for, and then the final thing is they'll focus it down and tell you exactly what they want. So how does this look? They might say something like this. All of us have gone through times when things don't go the way we planned. So that's kind of setting you up that, okay, they want to know about something that didn't turn out right. Maybe a time that you messed up on something or something didn't work out right. But they're giving you kind of a primer to think about. And then it's tell me about a time when, again, behavioral interviewing is always about something that you've done, not something that you will do. So a key thing to hone in on, if you're ever on an interview and they say, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of a time, tell me about a project you worked on. All that should be a kind of a quick thing. Oh yeah, Andy mentioned this. Here comes a behavioral interview question. And then kind of focusing the question, what they really want to know is perhaps you created a program that did not function as intended. How did you communicate the problem to your team? So looking at that question here, what dimensions do you think they're trying to target? If you were to ask this question, just what do you think? What do you think they're concerned about on this one? Could be two or three things. I'll just say that.
Communication.
Yeah, that's a top one.
Stress management.
Could be stress management. That might be part of it because it's sometimes things didn't go the way you planned. And maybe one other thing. What else might factor into this one?
Communication.
Already mentioned, but
Managing conflict.
potentially.
I mean, I was just going to think, like, taking responsibility for, like, admitting that.
It could be that. I was kind of going on the more technical side. You created a program that did not function. So maybe they want to get your technical skills and how you fix it. But the number one way, again, if I heard this question, I would want to answer it more that they really are kind of focusing on the communication aspect. They want to know how you maybe delivered it's a tough message to deliver. You screwed up. How did you tell your team? You know what? That's a tough one to answer. But that's what they want to know. So as you're listening to the behavioral questions, sometimes people go, oh, you created a program that did not function as intended. They want to know all about the technical work I did, especially for engineers. They want to know, what programming language did I use? How did I debug it? How did I solve that problem? Well, if you read the end of the question, they really want to know, how did you communicate the problem to your team? So if I were answering this question, I might spend a moment or two kind of setting the story up, telling them about the program that I worked on. But then the bulk of my answer might relate to, how did I communicate the results to my team? What was the effect on the team? And then finally, you don't want to end the story on a negative that you screwed up. That's kind of the beginning part of the question, something that worked right. But most importantly, remember to cycle back and tell the story that, while we initially messed up, here's how we solved the problem. Here's how I worked together with my team. So anyway, that's a quick sample of how a behavioral question looks. And what it might look like. And then the flip side of that, now here's where you come in. What is the employer looking for in an answer? Typically, an employer is looking for a certain set of statements from you to answer that question. And it's fairly easy to break it up into three areas. If you think of a star, you can kind of remember this. STAR, the S and the T stands for the situation or task. So when you're answering the question, they want to know kind of why. What happened? So if it was all things have gone through time, at times when things didn't go the way we planned, if I'm telling the person the situation in my answer, I might say, a year ago in my engineering class, I had designed a program doing XYZ, and unfortunately it didn't work as intended in the first pass through. There, I just set the story up. That's what an employer is looking for. They want to know a little context about what actions you took, which is the next step. So you have a problem, you just told the employer about the problem, then you want to make sure to highlight, well, what did you do to solve the problem? In that previous example, I was asking for the steps you took to communicate the problem to your team. So actions might be, I met with my professor to discuss the problem. I then set up a meeting with my team to discuss, what the solution would be. I organized a game plan that included doing X, Y, and Z. Whatever actions you took, you want to give the employer a set of action steps that you took to solve the problem. In my experience in working with students and alumni, and even people that have been out in industry for many years, a lot of times I might get the first two parts of an answer. I'll make it a little bit of the situation, I'll make it a little bit about the action somebody took, but it doesn't tell me the whole story. And unfortunately, a lot of people leave off the most important part of the story, and that's what was the result. You did all these things, but then what happened? Did you solve the problem? If you were communicating the problem to your team, did they understand what you were communicating? And then most importantly, what was the ultimate effect? Did it help the company make money? Did it help the company save time? What was the engineering project? Did you get an A on the project? You have to remember to, end your story on a positive note. Because at the end of the day, they're thinking about all these candidates, they have all these stories floating through their head. If all your stories end with a positive result, where it could be, again, you maybe save the company money, time, you got an A on a project. There's a lot of different results you can put in. But as long as they're of a positive nature, most likely they'll remember you above someone else. And they'll remember you're the person that was able to get the job done and do it right and do it successfully. So that's kind of what we call the STAR format of an answer. The nice thing about the STAR format, I'm not sure many of you are like me, but when I used to interview years ago, I haven't actually gone on an interview in a few years since my one at Drexel, but the nice thing about this, when I used to answer, sometimes I would get lost in an answer. Anyone ever feel that way on an interview? You kind of forget where the heck you were at in an answer. If you ever wind up in that situation, if you stick to this format, it helps reduce that. You can always kind of break your answer into 3 specific pieces. A situation, a couple actions, and a result. And at the end of the day, if you ever get lost in an answer, just jump right to the result. And the nice thing about doing that, when you give your result, it's a cue to the interviewer that you're done talking. Because one of the things I've noticed with a lot of people that haven't gone on many interviews, they don't know when to stop talking. They just kind of keep going and going and going. And a good interviewer will stop you and say, okay, I got what I needed. But some days, and Ken, if you went through that interview panel recently, if I've interviewed 8 people during the course of a day, by the time that 8th person comes along, I'll be honest, I'm tired. I'm just going to ask the question, tell me about a time when you did this. And frankly, I might just let you keep talking. I might let you just go and go and go. I'm not going to cut you off. It happens. I'm telling you, it happens all the time. So if you're just going to keep going, I'm not going to cut you off, well, you have to stop sooner or later. Put that result in your statement. That'll be the cue to the interviewer that you're done. And if you, again, do that throughout the interview, they'll consistently know when you're done giving an answer because you've hit that result. Now, how the person scores it, if you ever want to know, how do they know if I got a good answer or not? This is kind of a quick, high-level way to showcase, whether you've given a good answer or not. These are things that they're looking for. Was the story you just shared, was it recent? Share some kind of other examples. Sometimes when I used to do college recruiting, I would ask a student, tell me about a particular accomplishment you're proud of. And they would say, when I was in middle school, I just tuned out. I don't care. It's not recent enough. I want to know something that happened a year ago. The exception to that was a student who made it on Oprah Winfrey for inventing something. That was one time I let that answer slide. But any other time they said, in middle school, forget it, you're gone. So recent, you want to keep it typically, year or 2, 3. You want to try to keep it recent. You're going to value that experience a little bit more. But couple that with, is it relevant? So if you're applying for an engineering position and I ask you to tell me about a particular problem you solved recently, well, you're probably best off solving it or giving me an engineering example, if you have it. If I'm asking you about your software programming skills and I tell you about a time you had to troubleshoot a particular problem, probably give me a software engineering example. It makes sense, it's relevant. And then on top of that, if you have 2 choices, one example's a year ago and the other's 4 years ago, all things being equal, pick the one that happened more recently. That's what they want to know about. They'll be able to follow that story a little bit more. And then as the interview goes on, what they're trying to look for as they talk to you is, are your answers part of the pattern? Do you just have one example, or do all your answers show a consistent ability to communicate, problem solve, troubleshoot, or any one of those other dimensions that are on the sheet? That's kind of what they're looking for. And they're going to rate you usually in a kind kind of 1 to 5 scale. They might use a slightly different scaling pattern, but at the end of the day, they want to know, have you ever done it? If you haven't done it, they're not going to say you can't do it. They're just going to say, hey, this person was not able to prove they had that skill. You might be able to do it, I just don't know. Flip side of that is, the exceptional person, the rare to see. We used to call them the person that can walk on water. You give them a problem, they're going to solve it no matter what. Rarely see it, but, that's kind of what they're scoring. The hope is you get as many 5s during the interview as you can. So that's kind of how they're typically scoring the answer. And over the years, students and alum that are looking for positions typically would fall into one of these, I call them pitfalls, when giving their answer. Some of the pitfalls might be they would give very vague statements. So if I say, tell me about a project that you worked on, sometimes people would go, well, in my engineering classes, I always had to solve these tough problems. And they would never actually give me a specific problem. They would just say, I always, or I normally. If you're on an interview, interviewers can follow specific examples much better than general statements. So when you are interviewing and preparing for interviews, what you always want to do is think about specific projects you work on. They don't want to hear, in general, you worked on these engineering classes, you worked on all these different programs. No, they want to know specifics. You could, an example might be, in my engineering 401 class, I was tasked with designing a program that could do these 4 things, and then continue your story from there. They want to know specifics. Also, opinions, they want facts. Also, they want to watch out for giving theoretical or future-oriented statements. So if I say, tell me about a team that you worked on or a team that you led and how you helped that team become successful, I don't want to hear a statement back saying, well, if I were in charge of a team, this is what I would do. No, they want to know, again, the whole point of behavioral interviewing is how you've acted in the past. But a lot of people, if they've never gone on a behavioral interview, tend to answer with those future statements. And they would always say, if I were put in that situation, here's what I would do. And I think the thought is a lot of students that don't really know what the employer is looking for think that's the right answer. They think the employer wants to hear how they would act in a situation. Typically, no. They don't want to know how you would act. They want to know how you have acted in the past. Because that's how they're going to make their decision on whether to hire you or not. So again, just try to keep that in mind as you prepare for your interview. When you go on your interview, you want to have examples that can showcase you have certain skills and certain dimensions. Other things that I've seen students sometimes not do so well. The no results or lack of results. I mentioned the story should have 3 parts. The beginning, the situation, some actions, and then finally the results. A lot of people never quite figure this one out, don't put results in. So, as you again prepare for an interview, think about what you could share as a result. And it could be a very concrete result. For instance, you got an A on the class. For those that maybe were undergrads here and went out on co-op, if the co-op employer gave you a 5 on your performance review, that could be an example of a result. As a result of all the work I did on this co-op employer, I got a 5. I got a perfect score. Can't beat it. It can also be, this isn't as good of a result, but if you don't have anything else, sometimes you can just put a general statement at the end of your answer. So let's say you worked on a project for 3 months and you got done, and you can say something like, at the end of the 3-month project, my professor came up to me and basically congratulated me on doing such a great job on the project. It can be as simple as that. You don't need some astronomical result where you saved the company $1 million or got an A in a class, but think of something positive that happened. And again, when you end your story that way, that's when the interviewer will know to ask the next question or maybe ask some follow-up questions to you. And as you think about those results again, go back to that resume. If you don't have those results showcased on your resume, maybe there's a way to incorporate those results on your resume. That can also, again, make that resume look a lot better. Other things I've seen people do, I have no actions given when they're telling a story. Sometimes a little bit more than just not putting actions into a story. Sometimes instead of saying, I did these things, they'll consistently say, we, my team, did certain things. When you're on an interview, try to concentrate on yourself for the most part. Make sure to put that in and put actions in. A few other things, be relevant in old stories. Sometimes, again, we talked about the recency of an answer. You want to make sure your answers are somewhat close, not something that happened 10, 20 years ago. You want to watch out for that. Lies. People always ask me, maybe not in this class won't happen, but normally, if I'm sometimes in a one-on-one setting and teaching how to behave for an interview, someone might go, well, I never had an experience doing that. How am I supposed to tell them I did something? I know, I'm just going to make up an answer. Stay away from that, please. A good behavioral interviewer will probably figure out that you're lying, or what I used to do, if I thought somebody was lying, I would say, tell me about a time when you did something. Write it down, write whatever they said. And then if I thought they were lying, I would come back a couple days later, either a phone call or a follow-up interview, and say, hey, a few days ago, you gave an example when you did this. Can you tell me about the result again? What actions did you take? And more often than not, if they're lying, they can't remember what the result they gave a couple days before. A lot of liars are good at thinking quick on their feet, but not good at telling the same story 20 seconds. So they typically will pick it up, but it's not in your best interest to lie. So if you don't have a specific example, sometimes think of something that's similar. So if I ask perhaps maybe about a time when you programmed something using like C++, and maybe you've written a program using a different language, tell that story instead. So I don't have experience doing C++, I have had an opportunity to program using this language. Would you like me to share that story with you? And most interviewers say, yeah, no problem, let me hear that. So it's sometimes okay to transition the question a little bit to suit the story that you have. And the final pitfall that I've seen and happen over and over with behavioral interviewing is sometimes individuals think they can't tell the same story more than once. They think I have to have 100 different examples to share on an interview. But in a lot of cases, you can share the same story, but tell it either different ways or concentrate on different things. If you remember earlier, we gave that example about a time that a program didn't go the way you intended. And how did you communicate the results to the team? So you can tell that story one way, where you emphasize how you told the team about the problem and what you did to maybe solve the problem. Another way you can tell that story is, well, maybe they want to know about the technical problems that you faced when that program didn't go as intended. So instead of telling how you communicate the results to your team, tell the same story, but instead introduce it this way. You can say, earlier I told you about how I communicated the results to my team. Let me tell you a little bit more about the technical end of the problem that we faced and how I solved it. And then you just tell the rest of the story from that point on. So it's not telling a totally different story, it's just telling more about a story you told earlier. Because there were times when I used to interview, and they would interview with a few of my managers, and they would get to me, and I'd ask a question, and someone would say, I can't think of anything. And my managers had told me this person interviewed great, and say, did you already answer a similar question? Oh yeah, I answered earlier. Well, yeah, tell me that. I want to hear that story again. So don't be afraid to answer this or use the same story potentially more than one time. So let's just kind of get some more background about the whole behavioral interviewing, what you can do to be successful at it. Now, to prepare for an interview, and there's a few basic steps everybody should do before any interview, or even before applying to a company, but you'd be surprised, or at least I'm still surprised this day, these steps don't always happen. Before the interview, you want to analyze the company. How you can do that? Obviously, you can talk to Brendan, he can help you with some web resources on that. You can conduct informational interviews, as Ken mentioned earlier, and that's a great way to find out or analyze a company if you can get your foot in the door and talk to a company before you even go interview. Analyze the job description. 9 out of 10 times, there's a lot of information within the job description on what skills that they're looking for. And then, while analyzing the job description of the company, hey, figure out what competencies are critical. Again, it's not normally that difficult to do, but not many people go about doing that. So, for instance, does anyone have a watch on? I don't have time to do it today, but I did provide a sample job description. That was kind of the second part of that sheet. When you get a chance, this is one that we actually, I printed off one that was posted on our Dragon job site not too long ago, but it's a sample job description of a company. I think this was the Excelicom job description. I mean, you can kind of read through it and pick out what dimensions are critical. Even if you're not an engineer, it's not that hard to figure out what dimensions are critical. But then the final step is develop stars around those competencies. So once you identify the 5 or 6 competencies that are critical for that job, start thinking about stories that you can tell to an interviewer. Start thinking about how you would showcase that you have experience in certain areas. And for some people, it helps to write them out. I'm not one of those people. I usually just like to kind of think things through and go, okay, they're asked that, I can tell this story. Maybe jot down some of the big time results that you've had over the years, things that you want to talk about. That's how you can go in and prepare for an interview. That's how you can be successful at it. And the final thing is, not only do these things, but the final thing is to actually practice interviewing with somebody. I My office does mock interviews. You can have a friend, you can have, I'm not sure if many professors would do it, but at the very least, get used to answering questions in a STAR format. Even if it's in front of a mirror, even if it's by yourself somewhere. Say, hey, if I were asked this question, let me tell the story. Let me try saying it a few times. Because interviewing is a skill. You can learn it. You can get good at it. I can't tell you how many times when I'd interview somebody, I could almost always tell whether it was their first interview or their 100th interview, just because naturally people got better at telling stories. It really shouldn't work out that way, but hey, that's life. That is the way it is. If you go on more interviews, you're going to get better at it. You're going to become a skilled communicator in telling these STAR examples. Because telling an answer in that STAR format doesn't come naturally at first, but it does start to become natural very quickly. So just try it a few times. Practice setting the story up, giving a few actions, and putting the result at the end. And you can learn it, you can get good at it. It doesn't take, as I said, a ton of time. Looking at that example earlier, these were just some of the things that I picked out as dimensions from that job description that were critical. Are we going to have, Ken, are we going to have everyone's email list from here? I don't know. I'm assuming because we have your attendance, we have everybody's email address in here. I'll actually try to send this presentation out if you want it, and then you can kind of go through that practice exercise if you want. Again, we're just not going to have time today to go through it. And again, we kind of talked about these next steps. I mean, here's how to practice. Here's what the employers are looking for. Again, they may have slightly different dimensions at the end of the day, but I can almost guarantee most of them are on that sheet that I gave you. Again, feel free to contact Ken, myself, and we can help do a mock interview with you. If you do wish to conduct a mock interview, the best thing to do is tell us, as Ken was talking about with the job, we need to know what job you're interviewing for, what company it is. If you give us specific information, we can conduct a specific interview with you. Same thing with the resume reviews. If you want us to give us good feedback on it, give us a specific job you're applying to. Then we can try to give that, basically give that feedback. So that's a little bit about kind of behavioral interviewing, the theory behind it, what the employer is looking for. And again, I really wanted to share that with you today because not many students understand that concept or have been told that's why employers are asking certain questions the way they are. And a lot of our employers that are coming to Drexel are using a version of behavioral interviewing. They might get called something slightly different. They may ask the question slightly differently, but at the end of the day, they want to know, do you have an experience? Have you done it before? Can you apply it to their company? I'm kind of taking it full circle. Remember at the beginning, I said, there's a bad way to ask a question about, do you have 4 years of experience?